Hi everybody, we're back for some more basic video and film production. You can probably tell by me wearing the same clothes every time that I've been trying to do a lot of these lectures back to back to back before they shut me out of the building. So I really don't know what day I am on at any given time, and I realized that there's an assignment due on the day that I'm doing this particular lecture called a light plot assignment. And I really didn't get a chance to talk to you about it in one of the other lectures, so I'll talk to you a little bit about it now. I'll also send out some email information about it, and the instructions are on the Moodle page, but I'll probably push the deadline back for this just in case you didn't really understand it. Looking at this assignment, again, it's on the Moodle page. What you're going to do is you're simply going to design the lights for this scenario. So, now, I don't know how well it shows up on your screen, but what you're going to see on this page, you're going to see some people. Here's a person, that's person one by a lamp. Person two up there also by a lamp, and behind them is a window. We've got a full moon outside, so it's nighttime. Person three there by our fireplace. All these little arrows that you see, those are cameras. So you have to design the light for these three different shots. So all you're going to do is think about each shot and maybe the tone for each shot, and also what's the motivating light source for each shot. That's going to help you determine where key lights need to go and also what kind of fill light you might need. Now I'll kind of give you an example on this first one. On person one, we've got a lamp right here. Now that's probably going to be what we consider the motivating light source, right? That's where the main light will be coming from. So for this scene, you probably want to put a light somewhere in here to simulate the light coming from the lamp, and we call that the key light because that's the main source of light. That's where we want all the shadows to be generated off of. Now once we establish the key light here, we probably want some kind of fill light just to tone down the harshness of this. Since the key light is on this side of the camera, we'd want to put a fill light on this side of the camera, probably as close to the camera as we can, just to kind of give a little bit of soft, diffused light on this side of the person's face. So what I want to look for each of these, you're going to basically draw little lights for each one of these setups. And you can draw it all on the same page or draw it on separate pages, whatever is best for you. And hopefully you'll be able to scan that and send it back to me. But let me know if you have trouble getting it sent back to me. But whenever you draw those different setups, you're just going to indicate if it's a key light, if it's a fill light, or if it's a backlight, or something else like a kicker or whatever it might be. You're also going to indicate if it's a hard light, directional, or a soft light, diffused. And then other things you might want to discuss, you might want to talk about how bright a light is compared to another. If you want to add some diffusion or some color, maybe you want to add a little bit of pale blue gel to a light outside the window to make it look like moonlight. Just indicate those kind of things. Just basically be creative with this and design the lights the best you can. And if you want to, you can send me a rough draft of this. If you're confused and you just want me to look at it and kind of give you some advice, I'd be happy to do that before you have to turn it in officially. So again, I'll probably push back the due date for this a week. I think originally it was April 13th, so I probably will push that back to the 20th. Okay, let me get this off the screen, and then we're going to start with our next lecture. We're kind of continuing with editing, and the one we're going to do today is more of the creative techniques of editing. So we're going to kind of dig into some specific examples. But I also do want to talk about the process of editing a bit before we get started with more of the creative aspects of it. I think we kind of talked about this a little bit last time, how it's a good idea to watch your footage, to be familiar with your footage before you start the process of editing. That's always something that I would recommend doing. It's just going to make you, for one, a better editor, but two, I think you're going to know what's available to you so that if you start cutting, you can remember, yeah, I do have this shot that I can go to. So start just by watching it, organizing it, making sure that you know where everything is located. And then you can start with something called a string out. A string out is simply you placing shots onto a timeline, very rough. Typically you don't want to cut heads and tails too much at this point. You just want to get a basic structure laid out on your timeline to see what you have to work with. This will be a really long timeline. Don't worry about that. That's going to get trimmed down as you start working through the process. Once you get things laid out with a string out, that's when we go into what's called a rough cut. A rough cut is the most creative phase of editing because this is where you're making difficult decisions at times. Should shots stay in? How much of the shot should I cut? Should I rearrange shots? Should I move sequences around? Sometimes you might decide, hey, I want to do a non-linear story, so you're going to rearrange everything in your film. This phase takes time, so give yourself enough time during the rough cut to really find your story. Now, some people, after the rough cut, they stop without really going through and checking every single edit. This is where we do what's called the fine cut. In the fine cut, we're looking at edits, and this is really not where we're rearranging shots. This is where we're looking at every frame and deciding, hey, what should I cut here? Should I cut 4 frames here? Add a couple frames here. This is where you are tightening up your film, and you can really improve your film a lot doing the fine cut. It's amazing how much you can fix problems with rhythm, pacing, all those kind of things, just by going through and looking at each cut and getting rid of some of those extra frames. At some point, you need to get to what's called the picture lock. This is whenever you are done editing picture. Now, at some point, you do need to get to this because once you have picture locked, that will be when you first start doing any serious sound work. Highly recommend that you don't do any sound work except for, of course, the dialogue that you need and maybe some rough music tracks. But other than that, don't do any sound effects or ambient sound until that picture is locked, because once you start doing sound work, you start adding a lot more tracks, and things can get out of sync in a hurry if you have sound and picture work that you're doing at the same time. So get that picture lock done, then you can start doing your sound work, you can start doing your visual effects, your color grading, all that kind of stuff can come after the picture is locked. A term you're going to hear quite a bit in editing is juxtaposition. That just simply means placing 2 images side by side, and typically juxtaposition indicates maybe some contrast between those images, but not always. But juxtaposition is a really effective tool in editing because the way we place images together can really create new meanings. When we see this cut right here, when we cut from sheep to people rushing off to work, that has meaning to it, correct? It kind of indicates that these workers are just like sheep, kind of being herded mindlessly off to their jobs. So there's a lot of power that's associated in the way that we combine shots together. So think about how you can juxtapose shots to create new meanings, new symbolic messages through the way you edit your shots. Rhythm is another thing you want to think about when you start editing. You know, what's the pace of your film? If it's a high energy, action driven kind of story, then we want to have shorter shots, a more brisk pace to editing. If it's more of a Downton Abbey kind of thing, a more contemplative story, we might want to slow things down, let the pace, let those shots linger on screen longer. And that's going to help us kind of create that mood. We want to avoid abrupt changes in rhythm to where maybe we're going slow, 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 and all of a sudden fast for just 1 or 2 cuts, and then we're back to slow again, because that can be really jarring to an audience. So avoid those inconsistencies. Avoid also similar shots. Like if I'm cutting some shots, and maybe this is what you're doing for your B-roll assignment. Maybe you have a series of a bunch of wide shots. don't cut those wide shots together back to back to back because they look too similar. Even if they're different angles, different actions, just the size of those frames becomes kind of monotonous if they stay consistent. So go wide, then come in close, and then back out again, just to keep that rhythm going with your cutting. What this means right here, don't edit to the clock. You never want to have time be a reason to cut. Now, if I'm watching a shot and I'm thinking to myself, okay, this shot has lost its interest to me, okay, that's a point to cut. But I'm using my feelings towards that shot based on when I think it's kind of lost its functionality or its purpose. Because some shots can linger on for a long time and still hold my interest and still have meaning to it. The clock should never be a reason to cut. Some shots need to be on screen for 15 minutes at a time. Other shots, maybe half a second. It just depends on the purpose and function of that particular shot. Okay, so let's start talking about some specific techniques now. The most common editing technique is something called shot, reverse shot. That's simply whenever we show something, and typically we're showing a person, and then we show the reverse of that. What is it that they are reacting to? What are they responding to or looking at, talking to? Shot, reverse shot is a real effective technique, especially for conversations, because it allows us to get these great reaction shots that help communicate emotion and all those things in ways that words cannot. We'll talk more about conversations and dialogue editing later when we talk about sound design. But just realize whenever we are editing conversations, avoid the temptation to always be showing the person who's speaking. Because probably in most cases, it's the reaction shot of the other person that's going to be more meaningful, and you're going to get more information out of that reaction. So use shot, reverse shot, I think, to get more of this kind of image as opposed to just always staying on the person who's talking. And also just be sure whenever you're doing shot, reverse shot, that we're still maintaining all that screen direction, 180-degree rule stuff that we have talked about too. We've got to make sure that we're keeping people on that same side of the line. Parallel action. Okay, this is whenever we have two or more events going on at the same time. Now, one example I think probably a lot of you are familiar with is the end of Ferris Bueller's Day Off. We see in that film, Ferris is rushing to get back home before his sister can get back home to basically bust him. So we see these images of Ferris running through the backyards, trying to get home. We see the daughter, his sister, racing down the streets. And I think maybe even the principal's probably involved in this, I'm not sure. But as we get closer to the home, those shots start to pick up pace and they get quicker and quicker as we move towards that kind of coming together at the end. Okay, that's parallel action. It can be used for a lot of different purposes. It's used a lot in action sequences, chase sequences, where we're cutting back and forth between the person being chased and the chaser. They can use it for other things too. Like Godfather has a great use of parallel action during the baptism scene. Whenever Michael is standing as Godfather to his niece, I think, we are cutting away to these murders that he had ordered that are going on simultaneously, making a great connection between him, who's saying, yes, I renounce Satan, I renounce evil, but yet then we see all the evil deeds that he has ordered. So that's a nice use of parallel action. You can use it as a linking device between characters. Alfred Hitchcock does this a lot, where you show shots of two people, and we find ways to, as we cut back and forth between those two people, to kind of link them together. But mostly it's used kind of as a suspense device. So I'm going to show you an example from a film by the Coen brothers, and I'm going to go get it loaded up here. This is a film called No Country for Old Men, and in this scene, let me set it up a little bit for you. You're going to see one man in a hotel room trying to get this case. You're going to see another man with a bad haircut coming to shoot him. So watch how we're using parallel action here to show both events, and as we get closer to the big climax, we'll see those shots get a little faster and faster. Realize all these clips I'm going to show you today are pretty disturbing, so my apologies for that. Okay, so the Coen brothers kind of play a little bit of trick on the audience there, right? They lead you to think that the killer, the hitman, is coming to the other man's room, but then we realize that's kind of a deceptive technique. He's going to another room. But you see in that scene how we go back and forth between the two men, and as we kind of get closer to the climax of that scene, the shots get quicker and quicker to kind of help build that pace up. Really great visual storytelling, right? There's no words that are spoken during that sequence. We're telling it all with images. So they do a great job here of just using imagery to capture the threat of the scene. You see shots like him taking that huge shotgun with the silencer out, and that introduces the true threat of what's about to happen. So those kind of things are really effective editing techniques. Suspense is a great tool for filmmakers, and you can use it for all kinds of things. Suspense is not just for scary movies. Suspense is a great device for everything, comedy and drama and whatever. We just have to know how to work with suspense. Suspense is all about this anticipation of something that's going to happen. And sometimes that can be something of dread or something of humor, whatever. But when you get into a suspenseful situation, a moment, we want to allow that to kind of build and not rush it too much. Now, there's a lot of different ways we can create suspense through editing. I got a few examples up here on the screen, and you see one right here from Jurassic Park. That's kind of a famous one, where they arrive at Jurassic Park for the first time, and we see these kind of startled faces, but we don't know what they're seeing yet, until finally we get the reveal, they're looking at dinosaurs. And you can kind of use that, I think, to create, again, really good suspense, because the longer we hold on that, you, the audience, are starting to think, okay, what is it that we're going to see until we get that nice reveal. So things like that, we'd want to hold on for a while before we show what's being seen. You can kind of do the opposite of that too. We can reveal things to the audience before the character knows about it. Maybe I've told this class about it, maybe not, but Alfred Hitchcock had kind of this famous method of suspense. He would tell this story about how if we're going to have a scene in which maybe a bomb goes off. So we show somebody at their desk typing, and then the next thing you know, the bomb goes off, and the audience is startled for a moment, but then that emotion quickly fades. But if instead we show that person typing and then cut to a shot of the bomb ticking, then go back to the person typing, okay, now we've got a situation that's suspenseful, because we know that a bomb is going to go off. We want those people to get out of the room, so we're kind of creating this longer emotional sequence just by not letting things, by telling us things before the audience, or before the characters, knows what's going on. I'm going to show you an example of this one right here in a second. This will be a scene from Kill Bill. I think a lot of times with climactic moments, we're going to want to expand time. And I think we kind of talked about that a little bit in the last lecture, how we don't want to rush through those moments. But let me show you that clip from Kill Bill. This is another graphic clip, I'm sorry, but this one will give you a look at that kind of cross-cutting technique that can be really effective.
And now I'm going to kill you too. With your own sword, no less. Which in the very immediate future will become my sword. Bitch. You don't have a future.
All right, that's pretty graphic. In that scene, you see that technique at work, right? Where we're going back and forth. Each time that we cut to another shot, the shot gets a little bit closer, and finally the fight starts. But the fight itself is not very long, right? So we build that anticipation through that cross-cutting to enhance the action, enhance the intrigue. And you also notice there's a lot of shots of eyeballs kind of setting up what's going to happen there at the end. Okay, so that's suspense. Let's talk about something called motifs. Motifs are just recurring elements in a scene, either imagery or sound that we repeat for effect. It can be used for lots of different purposes. I think one of the more famous musical motifs comes from the film Jaws, where every time the shark is about to appear, you hear that familiar kind of sound, that music come up that indicates the shark is nearby. But you use motifs in other ways too. For example, some films like to do this thing called circular structure, where you start the film at a certain place, and then you end the film at the same place as the beginning, but you show either some change that's happened, or maybe the last chance for a character to change. A film called Sling Blade does this, where the character begins, you see the series of shots in this kind of insane asylum, and then we end at the film right here, same place, but he's been out in the world and he's gone through and seen a lot of things, and he's been changed by that experience. So we can use motifs, I think, for a lot of symbolic reasons, to add some kind of meaning where meaning might not have otherwise been. Effects, when we talk about transitioning between scenes, there's lots of different techniques we can use. We talked about some of this, I think, when we were doing studio shows. A dissolve is just when we blend two images together. A lot of times when we dissolve, we're trying to maybe indicate that time has passed. That's probably the most common use for a dissolve. I remember in film school, I had a professor who would say, if you can't solve it, dissolve it. Which basically he was saying, if you had a cut that wasn't working, just slap a dissolve on it. But really that's not what we want to do, because if you just have a single dissolve in the midst of a bunch of straight cuts, that's going to stand out. So typically with the dissolve, you're using that between two scenes. And I think usually the best way to use that is passage of time. If you want to kind of create this kind of poeticness, that's fine too, but typically it's more time passing. Fades, they can also be used for time passing, but a lot of times that's going to be used for dramatic emphasis, where something maybe very troubling has happened and we just want to fade to black and kind of linger on that moment for a bit. That might be a good use of a fade. Fades, of course, are always used, or not always used, but they can be used at the start and end of a project. That's up to you. You don't have to fade in and fade out if you don't think that's right for your particular story. Superimpositions, you see a really interesting superimposition right here. This is from the end of Psycho, where we see an image of Norman Bates. You see kind of a little bit of the mother's skull on top of him, superimposed with, and I know it's hard to see on this screen, but there's a chain that's pulling up this car, and we're linking all these images together to kind of show how Norman and his mother are forever chained together. So you can use a lot of cool superpositions to add more meaning to what's going on. Don't overuse techniques like that. That's usually something you want to use pretty sparingly. And of course, wipes are still off limits unless you really have a specific purpose for that. It's probably never going to be something you want to use, but there are occasionally films that have the right style to where some kind of unusual transition, some kind of wipe transition might fit, but there's not many of them out there. Just cutting between scenes, one general rule when we cut from one scene to the next scene is to avoid having similar framing. Now this is a little bit different than a jump cut, because we might be cutting from one location to another location, so that the information within the scene is completely different. But still cutting from a wide shot to end a scene and then cutting to a wide shot to begin the next scene is typically not the best way to do it. A lot of times we want to end with a close-up, cut to a wide, or vice versa. It just adds, I guess, a little bit more visual interest when we cut between those two scenes, as opposed to having them both be the same. You really don't want to cut from close-up to close-up too, because that would be really disorienting, because you might think that those images are still in the same scene, the same place. That's something you definitely want to avoid. Okay, smash cuts. This here is an example of a smash cut. This is a famous film in which we have a close-up you see right here of somebody with a straight razor, and then next image you're going to see is an actual eyeball being sliced. It's one of the famous smash cuts in film history. Now, it wasn't actually the woman's eye, it was the eye of a dead pig, but still, it's a very startling image. There was a film, I don't know if you saw this film with Jim Carrey, Me, Myself, and Irene, had a really disgusting comic smash cut where he had like snapped, he has a split personality, and his neighbor had always stolen his newspaper, and his neighbor's dog had always gone to the bathroom on his yard. So he comes over in this new personality, grabs his newspaper back, pulls down his pants and squats on the neighbor's yard, and then you cut to this brown substance oozing down the frame, and it ends up being a cut to an ice cream machine. But the cut itself is very disgusting and comically jarring. That would be a use of a smash cut for comic reasons. Another type of cut is called a match cut, and this is when we take an image in one scene that has a certain shape to it, and then we cut to the next scene with a similarly shaped object, something that kind of matches that, and that's a match cut. Now let me show you an example, then I'll show you a video example too. But this is one of the most famous match cuts from the film 2001: A Space Odyssey, where we have the whole opening caveman sequence of the film, and the cavemen discover intelligence, they discover bones can be used as weapons. We see this shot of the caveman throwing the bone up in the air. We cut from that image to a very similar shot of a satellite moving through space, using this match cut to kind of show the evolution of human intelligence, kind of linking past to the future. So match cuts can be pretty effective. They're pretty powerful symbolic devices, but not something we probably want to overuse. Use these kind of cuts sparingly. Okay, let me show you a clip that illustrates what a match cut looks like. This is from a film called Trainspotting, and you'll see this match cut is basically matching the movement of a character from scene to scene.
She's rolling away at the end of it all, pushing you last in a miserable hole, nothing more than an embarrassment to the selfish, fucked up brats that you've spawned to replace yourselves. Choose your future, choose life. But why would I want to do a thing like that? I chose not to choose life. I chose something else. And the reasons? There are no reasons. Who needs reasons when you've got hell?
Okay, so that match cut, again, based more on the movement of a character from one scene to the next to kind of connect these two parts of his life. So again, it's a cool technique, but don't overdo it. Hidden cuts are pretty cool. Those of you who watched 1917 recently, definitely probably, well, maybe you didn't see them because they're hidden, but you definitely did experience some hidden cuts because that film is supposed to be one continuous take, but of course you can't do that. It's just too hard to film an entire movie like that. So they have to find ways to hide those edits to make sure it looks kind of seamless. There's different ways you can do this. One way, and they use this quite a bit in 1917, is something called a color match. And that's basically, and usually the color we use is black because it's just easier to work with. But what we'll do is we'll move the camera across that color. So let's say we move the camera across black something. Could be just a shadowy area, could be the black of somebody's clothing. And then whenever the camera continues to move off of that, we are now at that new shot, whatever place we need to be. Now, the key to making something like this work is being sure to match the movement, placement of everything involved. If the camera is panning at this speed across in one shot, then it needs to be panning across at the same speed in the next shot, or else those two things are not going to match very well. So you got to really plan this out. This is a difficult one to pull off because there's so many things that need to be coordinated between the one shot and the next shot. You can also use what's called a whip pan to hide an edit, to hide a cut. So I'm right here on a shot of somebody, and then I whip really fast. And whenever you whip pan, it's going so fast that everything gets blurred out. So I could hide that whip pan, end one scene with a whip pan, start the next scene with a whip pan, find an edit point in the middle of that whip pan to blend them together, and then we're at the new place. So again, that's used whenever we just want to kind of create the illusion of some kind of seamless whole. Sound transitions. Sound can also be used to link scenes. Sometimes you'll have a scene in which sound continues on after the images of the scene have ended. We call that an L cut. The reason why we call it an L cut is just because of the way it looks on a timeline. See how the sound kind of continues on after that. I think probably more used is a J cut. J cut is when the sound comes in early and then the picture will come in afterward. And a lot of times this is used for startling effect to kind of jar us into a scene. So let me show you some examples of this, but also some of those hidden cuts as well. This is from a film called Usual Suspects. So you got several different transitions going on here. We'll talk about them once we finish the clip.
Christ, don't you fucking guys ever sleep?
We have a warrant for your arrest.
Fuck you, pig.
Who wants to know?
New York Police Department.
Sure brought up guys.
All right, in that clip, we see several different examples of transitions. The first one that you see was an example of the J cut that you see on the screen, where the sound comes in early, and it's really combined with a smash cut too, to create this kind of startling edit. So we have the sound of the paint can coming early, and it sounds like gunfire going off. Then we realize, okay, it's not just the paint can being shaken. Then we have the other one at the end of that next sequence where the character throws the rag into the lens, makes everything go to black. Then we cut to a shot of somebody passing the lens wearing something black to reveal we're at a new location. That'd be an example of a color match. That's a type of hidden cut. I think this scene is also interesting how they use jump cuts at the end of it, where we're condensing the time getting him into the police car by jumping ahead to different moments and using music to kind of drive those edits. It really adds a nice pace and movement and helps us avoid lingering on this potentially dull process of getting this person into a car. So sometimes, yeah, jump cuts can be used for creative and aesthetic reasons, and they can be really useful. Okay, I think that's all we have for this one. So again, the project you should be working on right now is that light plot assignment. So again, I'm going to push back that deadline probably a little bit to give you more time to work on it. But if you do have questions or you want to send me a rough draft of your first attempt at it, please feel free to do that. Otherwise, take care. I will see you next time. Goodbye.